Hello, this is Ukr TV, and we continue our broadcasting from Kiev. And our guest today is Edward Lucas. He is famous British journalist, writer, columnist, and he was a senior editor at The Economist. He was long-serving foreign correspondent in Berlin, Vienna, Moscow, and Baltic states, and he is an internationally recognized expert on espionage, subversion, the use and abuse of history, energy security, and information warfare. Now, Edward Lucas is a non-resident senior fellow and senior advisor at the Center for European Policy Analysis, and he's a columnist at Time. Mr. Lucas, thank you very much for your kindly agreement to give us an interview.
It's an honor to be on your show. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. In your interview 3 years ago, you say that the age of security umbrellas is over. Have the events of the last year changed the situation? And what next?
Well, I've been worried since the 1990s about Russian imperialism. I was living in the Baltic states in the early 90s, and we saw then this combination, which you've mentioned, of energy, information, money, all the other ingredients of what we call hybrid warfare, as well as military pressure. And so I've thought for decades that we are in an undeclared existential struggle with Russia about the future of Europe. I didn't think that this would be a large-scale war in Ukraine. I thought that Russia was too weak to fight the war effectively, and Ukraine was strong enough to resist it. And I was right, and Putin was wrong. He made the wrong decision. And now we have this terrible war, hundreds of thousands of people dead, millions maimed and traumatized, many millions homeless. I'm very angry that the West has failed to grasp the urgency of the situation. If we'd done 1 year ago what we're doing now, the war would already be over. But while we gradually learn, Ukraine bleeds, and this is a source of shame and anger to me.
Mr. Lucas, two questions. Why do you think such big war became possible? It was some mistakes from the West, for example, from understanding of Russia. But what was the reason of such big war? How it could be possible in 21st century?
I think it was a combination of overconfidence by Putin of his own military, a sense of urgency in the Kremlin that Ukraine was becoming a success story. And I think this is the fundamental cause for the war. It was that Russia could tolerate a weak and dysfunctional Ukraine. It could not tolerate a successful Ukraine with the stronger rule of law, effective political competition, economic growth, social development, all the things that were happening in recent months and years. I think it was also a product of Putin's perception that the West was weak. The West is divided, that America is on its way out, that the big European countries care more about money than they do about security. Perhaps also Brexit as a sign of fragmentation in the West. And so he thought he would get away with it, and he didn't.
About the mistakes, the title of your last article in Foreign Policy is Why Germany Has Learned the Wrong Lessons from History. And it is a very interesting conclusion, is it, in that article. The past decades were not a security nirvana, but a dangerous strategic timeout in which Europe's most important economy ignored a looming threat from Russia and China. The trust deficit between Germany and many of its European partners remains huge. This article, you wrote these articles in last December, in December 2022. It's just very fresh articles and fresh article and fresh impressions. Is it a problem for the West and for Ukraine as well?
Yes, there's a paradox that Germany and Germans believe they're doing the right thing and that they've done the right thing for a long time. And in fact, they've done the wrong thing. And this goes back many years. It goes back to the first West German deal with the Soviet Union on gas, which increased Europe's gas dependency on the East. Goes through the Gorby Mania era of the late 1980s, the close relationship between Kohl and Yeltsin, then the Schröder era and the Merkel era. And again, Germany has thrown its allies and friends under the bus in pursuit of better economic and political ties with Russia. The main driver of this is greed. There's also cowardice, unwillingness to accept responsibility. And it's all dressed up in sanctimony. We're doing the right thing. You should be grateful. We believe in dialogue. It's you guys that believe in confrontation. And it's really irritating. And I speak as someone who has lived in Germany, speaks German fluently, has spent most of my life as a friend of Germany. And there are people in Germany who get it. You know, the Green Party leadership gets it. People in the FDP get it. There are many Germans who are ashamed and disgusted by their country's policy, but they're still dithering. We still see Scholz saying the right thing, but then failing to do it. And this is very frustrating. Ukraine is paying in blood and tears for Germany's education in the way the world works and in its responsibilities in that world.
How West changed during this year, the year of big war?
Well, I think that the narrative of inexorable Western decline, which was pushed not only by Putin but also by China, has ended. We now see the West does exist. There is an Atlantic alliance. The European Union is willing to think strategically. We do care about more than just trade and investment. We care about our security and about other people's security. That's good news for Ukraine. It's good news for Taiwan. It's good news for all sorts of people all over the world. So the West has woken up to some extent to the dangers it faces and the responsibilities it has. I think we have failed to realize quite how isolated we are in a kind of global context, that the global South, these big countries like Nigeria, South Africa, Brazil, Indonesia, India, these giant democracies, don't see it the way we see it. They see the Ukraine war as a kind of extension of Afghanistan, some Western proxy that's getting a kicking, and probably deservedly so. We try and explain that this is an anti-imperialist war, that you are being attacked by your former colonial master, which wants to re-establish its colonial hegemony. And we are failing to get that message across. So I think that the West has lost a huge amount of its moral, ideological, if you like, clout and capital in the global South. And that's the result of 30 years of selfish, short-sighted and incompetent policies on everything from the way the world trading system works through to the management of the pandemic, climate change, and many other things.
I remember that you say about the end of age where security umbrella is working. Yeah. After the 1 year of big war, something changed? No? What about these security umbrellas? Is it possible now how everything will change, or what next?
Well, I think there's a great awareness in Europe now of our strategic nakedness without the Americans. We would be so stuck if it was not for the help of the United States. Europe could not help Ukraine the way that Ukraine needs to be helped on its own. We don't have the military capacity to do it, and we are living with the consequences of 30 years of neglect of our defense and security. So we see that American umbrella really clearly now, and we worry it's not going to be there forever. The Americans have other priorities, particularly China. We could get another President Trump, We don't know what's going to happen, and we need to make our own preparations. So I think we need new security architecture in Europe that produces a European security umbrella. I don't think that can be centred on Germany for reasons we've discussed. I don't think there's enough trust in France. I think Britain could be the linchpin of the new European security architecture. And as a politician in Britain, because I'm standing for Parliament here for the Liberal Democrats, this is something that I'm pushing very hard, that Europe's security needs Britain and Britain needs Europe, and we will get some kind of deal done on that sooner rather than later if I have anything to do with it.
New security architecture, I think that new security architecture needs time to be created. How long it could take, I don't know. And what is the role of Russian-Ukrainian war in creation of this new architecture, and how you see the role of Ukraine, for example?
Well, I think it is already being created, actually, and I would point to the Joint Expeditionary Force, which is a British-led 10-country military framework focused particularly on the Nordic-Baltic region. And in that region, we see Sweden and Finland now very close to joining NATO. And this is a game changer for this Nordic-Baltic region. It's become, I think, more secure than it's ever been in its history. Although there's plenty more to do, the ingredients for strong regional security are there. We don't have that security architecture in place in terms of Europe's dealings with Russia. We don't have that architecture in place for the Black Sea region. And in both of those, Ukraine is really important. So we need to think, what does post-war, probably post-Putin, relationship with Russia look like? I think we believe, we hope that Ukraine will win and Russia will lose, and this will be bad for Putin, probably terminal. But then we still have to deal with Russia. We have to give Ukraine the security it needs. I support NATO membership or its equivalent on that front, but we will be dealing with an angry, vengeful, demoralized, huge country under some sort of leadership in the Kremlin, maybe with more centralization, maybe with less. But we don't have at the moment a clear strategic vision in Europe of how to deal with that. And then we've got the problem in the Black Sea, where we have grave difficulties with Turkey, which is moving away from democracy, and very big questions about Turkey's long-term future as a, quote, Western, unquote, country. And of course, what we've just seen in Georgia, these terrible events of the last 24 hours. So there's a lot of thinking to do. I hope we will listen to the Ukrainians. You are not just consumers of security, you're also providers. You have great insights into the way Russia works, and your experience in fighting Russia is extremely hard won and also extremely useful.
Mr. Lucas, what scenarios for the end of the war are possible today? If we, take into account different factors, for example, the activity of the West, the unity, the new architecture, new security architecture, the situation in Russia, and many, many different aspects, what scenarios are possible?
Well, it seems to me that the Russian spring offensive has basically failed at enormous cost to Russia. The strains within the Russian military system and political system are increasing. There is the possibility of a successful Ukrainian counteroffensive, which will further intensify those strains. And I think that as the military difficulties for Russia increase, so do the political difficulties for Putin. And predictions are always a risky business, but I think Putin's facing very serious problems now. And I think that we will see this interaction of military and political difficulties leading to some kind of military, perhaps collapse is too strong, but severe military setback for Russia, where they will be negotiating on the back foot from a position of disadvantage, giving up all or most of the territory they've seized since 2014. And I think at the same time we will see Putin becoming the scapegoat for the war that he's launched, and we will see some post-Putin regime in Moscow which will blame Putin for the war. do to reconstruct Ukraine, a huge job to do to give Ukraine security, and a huge job to do to deal with post-Putin Russia.
What about future of Russia? Because Russia have a very comfortable position in Europe. If we speak about energy, yeah, if we speak about the security, European security, because many people in Europe think that Russia could be the part of this European security. But now everything changed, or many changed. Yeah, what do you think? What could be the future of Russia, and what could be the role of non-Western country in all this situation? For example, China, India, or other countries.
Well, these are huge questions, and I don't think we have the answers fully. I think it's possible that Russia becomes like Iran, a kind of resilient rogue state with a very strong sort of ideological / economic mafia running it, and we have just to deal with that for years and years of the sanctions and friction and military conflict in all sorts of countries sponsored by Russia. So that's, if you like, the Iranification of Russia is one possibility. Another is that we have some kind of post-Putin junta, which turns inwards rather than outwards, and is trying to keep the country together. Another is that we see some new leadership which tries a reset and says to the West, hey, look, this was Putin's war. We're over this now. We want to be friends. Please help us because the bad guys are just around the corner. And we've seen that already in the 1990s when Russia was brandishing the threat of extremism and demanding concessions from the West. So that's a possibility. And then there's disintegration. I would argue that Russia, in a way, has already disintegrated because Chechnya is not really part of the Russian Federation. And these private military companies that we see, not just Wagner, but many others, show that the state's monopoly of armed force is breaking down. So I think my guess, and it's only a guess, is that we are facing another smuta in Russia, another time of troubles. And this poses a big question for the West, because countries next to Russia, it's not great having smuta, but it's a lot better than the alternative. The further away you get from Russia, for the big countries of the Old West, they say, oh dear, loose nukes, chaos, refugees, environmental problems. We don't like this. We'd rather have stability. And I think that within Europe, there's going to be a big debate, perhaps even more strong than that, a conflict between countries that say, yes, we will live with a Russia, troubled, disintegrating Russia, and those who say, no, we must do whatever we can to try and keep Russia stable.
What is interesting is that you say nothing about the democratic future, or nearest democratic future of Russia. It is interesting. No chance?
Well, I don't see it. I mean, there are people who think this is a possibility and we'll get a kind of another glasnost era, but I feel that this xenophobic, chauvinist, militaristic rhetoric has gone very deep into the Russian system, and it's going to be some time before it comes out. I'm 60. I think I will probably live to see Russia as a normal post-imperial state, but I'm not expecting it anytime soon.
And the last question, do you think that this war will be long war?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Do you think that this war will be a long war? It's taken years and many months.
Well, I mean, there's a tremendous complacency in the West. We don't realize the huge, you're losing, 100, 200 people a day, either killed or seriously wounded. And this is a terrible price to pay. And it's been going on for a year. And in this, the longer the war of attrition goes on, the more I fear it favors Russia, because Russia's just so much bigger. They can throw bodies into battle the way they throw logs onto the fire. So I really want it over this. Tomorrow is already too late. I'd like it over today or even yesterday. And that, I think, will depend on the quantity and quality of Western supplies and training. But my prediction, and it's really guesswork, is that the underlying weaknesses on the Russian side are pretty severe. They're increasing, they're compounding and reinforcing each other. And so I think that victory and peace may come sooner than some people think.
Mr. Lucas, thank you very much. Edward Lucas was our guest today, and stay with us. It is UkrLive TV.